Good afternoon, everyone. Let me say a couple of things up front. As you know, I just returned from Puerto Rico, where I stood in solidarity with 3.5 million of our fellow Americans who live in Puerto Rico. And I have to emphasize this is an issue that should be of concern to all of us across this country, in particular to those of us in New York City, given our deep, deep relationship with Puerto Rico. Almost 700,000 people live in this city come from Puerto Rico in terms of their heritage and have a deep connection to the island and are tremendously concerned about what's happening there and where it's going. And it is not wrong to say there is a potential humanitarian crisis in the making. Right now, the Puerto Rican healthcare system is declining rapidly. 3.5 million people have fewer and fewer doctors and less access to health care, and it's because of unfair federal policies. Let's be very blunt about it. Puerto Rico is treated differently than the rest of the United States when it comes to Medicaid. The formula is much less fair. So here is an example of a group of Americans who are not being given the same rights and the same access to care as the rest of us. And that's unfair, it's un-American. And on top of that, it fuels part of the financial crisis that Puerto Rico is experiencing, which we all know is not good for any of us. To see part of our country in financial distress and to see it go unaddressed by the Congress is unacceptable. The President has put forward a very comprehensive and effective plan to deal with the financial crisis, the Medicaid problem, the need for Puerto Ricans to have more access to the Earned Income Tax Credit. The President's plan is a good plan. It's time for Congress to act. And I want to be clear that some of what's underlying this, unfortunately, comes from some very bad motivations. This crisis is in part being created by hedge fund managers who are trying to take advantage of the plight of the Puerto Rican people. As Senator Warren has called them, vulture hedge funds that are literally trying to make a profit off of the financial danger facing Puerto Rico. We can't let that happen. Congress was very quick to act when our banks were in danger back in 2008. Congress should be equally quick to act when 3.5 million Americans are in danger. So I'm going to keep working on these issues, of course, working particularly closely with Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito and with our congressional delegation. I had a great meeting yesterday with the governor of Puerto Rico, Alejandro Garcia Padilla, and we went into real depth about the extent of the crisis, what he sees as a way forward, and the important role that leaders here in the 50 states have to play in making these changes on behalf of the Puerto Rican people. I told him I would particularly focus on rallying my fellow mayors to the cause of Puerto Rico. I also had the opportunity to spend time with a number of leaders from New York City, particularly obviously from the Latino community. We talked about our shared commitment to defending Puerto Rico, and we talked about a lot of the other work we're doing here to serve the Latino community of this city. Obviously, some of our key initiatives, pre-K for all, affordable housing, municipal ID. A number of the initiatives that have been the focus of this administration are having a very positive impact on the Latino community, and we're going to be working with those elected officials and community leaders to deepen that impact. Just a few words in Spanish on this, and then I want to talk about one other topic. Acabo de regresar de Puerto Rico, donde me uní a los puertorriqueños para pedirle al Congreso que actúe ahora y salve el sistema de salud de la isla. Voy a trabajar con líderes de todo el país para conseguir apoyo a nivel nacional para Puerto Rico. Confío en que toda nuestra nación apoyará a sus conciudadanos americanos en Puerto Rico. Second topic I want to talk about is related to our Vision Zero vision and the work we're doing on it. It has been a tough week, a very, very tough week. 8 New Yorkers lost in crashes. And it's a reminder of why Vision Zero is here to begin with. Because the people we're losing are our grandparents, our parents, our children. The stories have been so painful. But we know there are real changes that have been made that are making a difference, and changes that will continue to be made that will reduce the number of crashes and save more and more lives. We know it is critical to keep deepening Vision Zero because it works. It's never been more necessary than now. And every death will be investigated, and those responsible will be identified and prosecuted accordingly. But there are so many things we can do proactively to protect lives. We're changing people's behavior slowly but surely by constantly reminding our fellow New Yorkers of their responsibility behind the wheel. And I can tell you we see real evidence that people are changing their habits because this message has been sent very clearly for 2 years. And we're helping people understand that the word Vision Zero, the phrase Vision Zero, comes from the notion, again borrowed from other countries that pioneered this strategy, that we should assume crashes are avoidable, that they're not inevitable, they're avoidable. And we see the public education making an impact. We see the lower speed limit making an impact, the enforcement of the lower speed limit. NYPD has issued 100,000 speeding tickets this year so far, 100,000, which is nearly twice as much as before Vision Zero was put into effect. In terms of failure to yield, this is an area that got so little attention in the past, failure to yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk. Those tickets are up 3 times, over 30,000 have been issued. So we know the speed limit is making a difference, the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. We know the enforcement's making a difference. We have 75 streets and intersections that have been redesigned already this year, the most ever in 1 year, and that will continue for years to come. And we have 140 speed cameras up and running. And in those areas, we see a 2/3 drop in speeding as a result of those cameras being there. So this is where numbers do matter. I know a lot of times there's a legitimate question asked when we talk about numbers, when we talk about statistics, does it capture the human reality? Every single human being who's not a part of those statistics is another person among us, is a family member who wasn't lost. So this year, a 16% drop in traffic deaths compared to last year, 188 so far this year compared to 223 last year. And I remind you, we had a record year for progress last year. Vision Zero really has only just begun. In terms of implementation, it's a little over a year old, and you're going to see a lot more impact. We're going to deepen these policies and deepen the enforcement that goes with them. And we're going to continue to drive down this problem and reduce the number of deaths. The families who have suffered from traffic fatalities have been extraordinary in their efforts to change things. They've been such powerful moral voices. They've made a huge impact on the discussion, both here and in Albany. I'll be joining family members on November 15th for a day of remembrance. But it's not just a day to think of the people we've lost and to honor them. It's a day to commit ourselves to further action in their name. Just want to quickly talk about it in Spanish. Esta semana lamentamos la pérdida de 8 vidas más en nuestras calles. Otra razón por la cual Vision Zero es una prioridad. Estamos trabajando duro para hacer a nuestras calles más seguras y hemos visto reducciones importantes en el número de muertes. Vamos a profundizar estos logros y el 15 de noviembre me uniré a las familias en un día para recordar las vidas perdidas y enfocarnos en lo que podemos hacer para salvar a otros. So I want to take questions on these first 2 topics, and then we'll open up to other topics. I want to see if there's any questions on either Puerto Rico or Vision Zero. Yes?
Excuse me. When you assert that hedge funds are partly responsible for causing the financial crisis in Puerto Rico, what specifically are you talking about?
I'm talking about the fact that the Congress hasn't acted, and I think there's a clear question. very different situations, natural disasters, the financial crisis, 2008. There was an assumption for many, many years that when a part of our country was in danger, our national government would step in. There was an assumption that when there was a bigger threat like the Great Recession and the financial crisis, the national government would step in. We saw after Sandy, again, all these situations are different, but we saw after Sandy there was a hesitation and there was a real fight. And then finally, the federal government did do the right thing and stepped in. How do we have 3.5 million Americans in danger and there isn't a willingness to step in? And some of that you could say is dysfunction in Washington or ideological differences, but I think it's important to look at the fact that there's some very powerful people who are betting on the failure of the Puerto Rican fiscal situation, and that's a sad reality. And they're powerful, and they have a lot of influence in Washington. So we've all heard the phrase, follow the money. I think it's important to consider the fact that there is a very powerful group of people in the private sector who actually are hoping that Puerto Rico fails. And that may be part of what's holding up action, and we can't allow it to hold up action. Yeah.
On Vision Zero, there's been, as you said, this uptick in tickets. When do you anticipate that sort of either leveling off or people responding to the public pressure of adjusting their behavior? Do you anticipate these tickets rising, or do you anticipate at some point sort of leveling off and people adjusting their behavior in a way that's observable?
It's a great question. Look, we have some very smart people working on Vision Zero, and they may have a sense of projection I haven't heard yet. I think it's fair to say it's a little early to be able to tell you when we think sort of the information is saturated and people have fundamentally changed behavior. Let's remember that for many, many years in this country, the car has been a little too sacred. And we were losing people to traffic fatalities without changes in policy. And I think the consciousness really changed. I was very struck when we announced Vision Zero, how quickly people embraced it. A lot of folks had said to me they thought there would be hesitation on things like a lower speed limit. We found the opposite. We found a lot of appreciation for it and belief in it because too many people had died. That's what it came down to. Too many people had died. And I think what's happening is the public information efforts, the new speed limit, the enforcement is changing behavior. I don't think we're done. I think we're certainly, we have this year, I think, well into next year before we'll be able to pass some judgments, because we also know that there's a lot still being put in place in terms of enforcement and certainly in terms of redesigning the intersections and streets. So I think we can say there's progress, but I don't have a particular vision for a level off point. I think it's a question we'll be able to say a lot more on next year.
On the ticket numbers that you gave, do you happen to have a direct comparison to last year handy, or?
On tickets?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is 100,000 this year on speeding tickets as nearly twice the number before Vision Zero. Now, what we can get for you, if that means the year before we came in or what it means, because obviously Vision Zero wasn't initiated until a certain point last year, so we'll clarify that. And again, 3 times as many on failure to yield, 30,000 now. And as I said, failure to yield was an area that was not enforced very consistently in the past. Yes?
On Vision Zero, does future enforcement also include cracking down on so many drivers that are driving without licenses? Because there seems to be the people that this takes place that involves, and that it's they're going to be out there again without a license. Anything that's stepped up, not only enforcement but prosecution?
Very vigorous enforcement across the board. I think we have a set of different problems. People without licenses is a real problem. Clearly, folks driving under the influence is a real problem. I've talked to Commissioner Bratton and Chief Chan about this, and they're very focused on setting up checkpoints in places where there's been a particular problem and particular days or nights where there's a particular problem. But I think a lot of it is people who have a license and are not under the influence, but are driving too fast. I still think that's our #1 problem, and not being mindful and not respecting pedestrians. That's why I say this failure to yield has been a huge issue. Because let's face it, it's a very crowded city, people jockeying for position, but in the end, if you're driving a car, you have to yield. You have to recognize the danger of using that car wrongly. So more and more enforcement you can assume, and we can certainly tell you if there's anything specific being focused on folks without licenses.
This day of remembrance that you're talking about, is that with the 8 families from this week, or it's with just, in general, people who have lost?
We'll get you the details, but as you remember, in the last 2 years, the family members, we've stood with them a number of times, who are organized now, and unfortunately there are a lot of them because so many people have been lost. They've been very active pushing for these changes. They pushed for the laws passed by the City Council. They pushed for the changes in Albany. So we'll be standing with a number of them. And that's, again, it's a well-organized group that's had a real big impact. Yes?
Another question on Vision Zero, slightly tangential, related to bike lanes. We've been trying for several weeks to get some more information about why bike lane enforcement is different in different neighborhoods. And I was wondering if you know anything about that, and if not, if you can help us get that information.
Well, certainly make sure you get the information. The couple of things to say about that. First of all, we were very clear about Vision Zero. Job one was to address vehicles, because that's the core of the problem. That is not to say that there shouldn't be bike enforcement. We've had some very focused bike enforcement. We'll continue to ramp that up where needed. And by the way, it's not to say we shouldn't address the fact that pedestrians often need to be more mindful, and you've seen some examples of that kind of enforcement too. But let's be clear, the central problem is vehicles being used wrongly and endangering others. Now, the other point is every precinct, this is the very nature of neighborhood policing, it's the very nature of CompStat, every precinct will have a different approach depending on their conditions. And we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think that's why you see those variations. But you know, we had a focused situation, for example, in Central Park around bikes where there was very intensive enforcement that had a big impact, and people have said very clearly that made a real change. So that kind of thing will happen wherever it's necessary. But we'll get you further information about how different precincts have handled it. Okay, anything on these two issues before we open up to others? Last call, Puerto Rico or Vision Zero? Yes, please.
I just want to get back to this idea that investors have somehow bet against Puerto Rico, because aren't there investors who are bondholders and they don't want to, they want to bail out?
Clearly. Now, I said, I want to be clear. You're saying investors, I said hedge funds. And I'm not saying every hedge fund. There's a group of them, and it's well reported. I've read many, many articles, including from your fine periodical on the way down to San Juan. And it's very clear there's a group of hedge funds that are betting on failure here, and that's how they intend to profit. There's plenty of investors who want the situation righted, so I'm not saying they don't matter in the process too. But when you try to figure out why would there be inaction when 3.5 million people are in danger, and this is a salvageable situation, and the President of the United States has offered a plan. So again, you can say, well, some of that's government dysfunction and some of that's ideological difference. But that didn't stop resolution in 2008 with the banks. And in a different way, Detroit's a much different situation, obviously, but resolution was found. There has to be a commitment to resolution. I think a difference here that needs to be very carefully examined, and this is where I think the media would do everyone a service, is to figure out what is the role of those hedge funds that actually want to see failure for profit. What is going on with that? And I think Senator Warren has raised that point very powerfully. Okay, last call on these topics. I'm sorry.
Yes, one of the people who perpetrated the traffic death was an MTA bus driver this week. And I know there's been calls for legislation to exempt them from some of the Vision Zero laws. Have you taken a position on that? And are you concerned about the number of fatalities that have been carried out by bus drivers?
I'm very concerned about the number of fatalities overall, and then specifically why we've seen a serious number involving MTA buses. As you know, I've reached out to the MTA and asked for action on the question of whether the design of the buses is causing part of the problem. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but there seems to be substantial evidence that the bus design is a problem and that there is an actual fix for it that's not prohibitively expensive. So we want to focus the MTA on this, and I think we need an action plan on this very quickly. I don't think that's the whole story when it comes to the buses, but it well may be part of it. But no, the law is quite clear. It doesn't matter if you're a public employee or private citizen. The decisions will be made based on the evidence. The police officers on the scene will make a determination on whether an arrest is appropriate or not. And let me emphasize, in one of these incidents in the last week, the driver left the scene of the crime. And that is unconscionable, it's unacceptable. It's obviously a very serious criminal charge unto itself, and that will definitely be prosecuted. So there's nothing that we've talked about that changes that fundamental reality that the law applies to everyone, and no one is allowed to leave the scene of a crime that they were a part of. Okay, other topics? Yes, Anna.
How would you respond to growing criticism that the city isn't adequately preparing for an influx of traffic that will come with the redevelopment of the North Shore, in particular, the New York Wheel and the Empire outlets? A lot of people are calling for DOT to come up with a long-term plan, and that hasn't happened yet, even though it was promised.
Well, we'll continue to do that work. There's no question we need a plan. It could be, look, we don't know what the ultimate impact will be. We obviously understand a lot of things can be projected, but until you get there, you don't see the full reality. But we do need to have a plan, unquestionably, and I will certainly push DOT to get that done quickly. The work, the development is still a ways away, meaning in terms of when people actually show up and the wheel is operational, et cetera. But I think folks in Staten Island have every right to want to see a plan, and we'll produce one. Yes.
Affordable housing has been a central tenet since you've taken office, but there are about 1,500 people who live in NYCHA right now. They're making six-figure incomes, the top earners making nearly $500,000. Should NYCHA create a pathway out so that they can sort of free up some of these spots that are on the wait list for only about 3,000 apartments that are available?
It's, to say the least, a complicated question, because in some cases that is a family, for example, who's been there for decades and is part of the fabric of the place. It's a fairly rare reality, as you know, and the numbers indicate. But it's not, for me, it's not an open and shut situation. We've been talking to HUD about this and trying to determine what the right standards are. So I think there are some situations where, yeah, families should, if they get to a strong financial place, move along. I think there's others where it's more debatable. If it's a family that has a very long time presence in the development and a stake in it, I think that gets a little more complicated. So we haven't finalized our policy on that. Michael.
Mr. Mayor, we reviewed your public schedules and found that since the end of August, you've consistently held one open off-topic question and answer session with reporters per week. That's a reduction in frequency from previously in your own administration. It's also a reduction from your predecessors. And I wanted to ask if you could share with us the philosophy behind that shift and if you are comfortable with it.
Absolutely comfortable. The philosophy is straightforward. We, in the first year and a half, focused on putting a number of big initiatives into play. Vision Zero, affordable housing, pre-K, municipal ID, a number of others. Obviously, the change in police-community relations, our equity and excellence plan for schools, a host of big sort of templates that are going to govern what we do for a long time to come. Now we're going to put a lot more emphasis on going out to communities and talking to communities about the work we're doing, but also hearing from people what they need. That will include everything from meetings with clergy and community leaders and elected officials to speaking in houses of worship to town hall meetings in the traditional sense or smaller group meetings, and just being out in communities talking to everyday people spontaneously. That's going to be where a lot of time and energy goes. The second thing we've been doing more and more of is opportunities to talk to the people through the media. For example, radio call-in shows. You'll be seeing more of that. So the idea I think that makes sense to us is we're going to have press availabilities that focus sometimes on big topics and where we want to really go in depth and give you lots of opportunity to ask questions about that. We're going to have availabilities that talk about anything and everything like this one. We're going to be doing a lot of one-on-one interviews. We're going to be doing a lot of radio shows, including call-ins. You're certainly going to see a lot of my deputy mayors and commissioners meeting with you and talking to you, either one-on-one or in group settings. And again, all the grassroots pieces, the town hall meetings, et cetera. And you'll be seeing us create a certain amount of information that we provide directly to the people. That mix, to me, makes sense as the best way to communicate what we're doing and also to hear back from the people.
Is this setting this traditional setting that's been in City Hall for many years of the press corps being able to ask you questions on any subject of the day. Do you feel comfortable in that setting?
I've been doing it a long time, and I've been doing it a long time before this office. I'm comfortable. The question is, what's the best way to approach today's reality? It's a different reality today. We don't approach government the way others approached it. That's a blunt truth. There are a lot of assumptions that some of my predecessors have I just don't have about how we do this work or what our obligations are to people or what we can achieve. I don't want to treat it as a perfect parallel, but I think it makes the point. My predecessors, none of them thought we should have or could have full-day pre-K for every child in the city. I thought we could. I think there's many other areas. Vision Zero is another example where that assumption about what government could and should do wasn't there. We've changed the paradigm. We're going to change this paradigm too because we think there are better ways to communicate and better ways to be connected to the people. And there's going to be a lot of information flowing. And I also emphasize, anytime any one of you has a question and wants to know my position, you will get that answer. Sometimes it'll be me standing here or standing at an event in the community. Sometimes it'll be me on a radio call-in show or some other type of format or an online type of format. But I think it's fair to say you can also always address any concern to our press office and you'll get an answer on where we stand promptly. Russ.
Do you ever see your relationship with Governor Andrew Cuomo improving? Do you think it's improving right now? Where do things stand?
You know, I want to just push back the notion that it's about relationship, quote unquote. I think it's about work. I think we did some really good work on the MTA and got to a good result. But it was a lot of give and take. I was centrally concerned about the need for reform. I was not going to be party to any plan that allowed Albany to keep taking money out of the MTA and use it for other purposes. We got to a good place on that. It was a lot of give and take, a lot of pushing back and forth, but that's how negotiations are. We got to a good plan, and a plan that's good for the future of the people in New York City. I think on the Legionnaires' crisis, we got to a good common vision between the city and the state about how to implement a series of changes related to the cooling towers. And that was ultimately a very cooperative effort. That's going to be the template. Whenever we can find something to do or we can get something done, we want to do it. And when there are differences, we'll talk about those differences too. But I think there's plenty of good work we can do together. Yeah.
There was a story this week in the New York Times about some of the consultants that advise you. It builds upon some earlier reporting. But it brings up the questions that some of us were asking earlier this year, but about outside consultants who are regular advisors to you, who also represent private clients. And I'm wondering if you think that people who meet with you, speak to you on a regular basis, there's a select group of them who also represent private clients, if they should have to disclose those private clients to the public. And if you don't think that they should, then can you please explain why? There are questions about potential conflict.
Yeah, they are in the private sector. I'm in the public sector. So I do the disclosing of, who I meet with whenever there's lobbying. We've been very consistent from day one. By the way, no other administration has done that before. When I meet with a lobbyist, a city registered lobbyist, and they talk about a topic on behalf of a client, we put it online proactively. You don't even have to ask. We just do it. And we disclose, obviously, through all disclosure rules. We now have just restarted our campaign account. We're going to disclose everyone who gives to it, et cetera, et cetera. I think the story in the Times, if you look carefully at it, was telling. The controversial matters that were raised were regarding some scheduling issues, and as the story indicated, some of which we thought was a good thing to go on the schedule, others which we said no to. I think this is a story that's not being presented in its fullness. People have advisors who are important to them, and it's part of how you do the work. And I think every administration has had that. I just think it's part of being effective is to have a group of people who you believe can give you good advice to help you get the work done. But everything I'm supposed to disclose, we are very scrupulous about disclosing. Go ahead.
Just to follow up, if you meet with a lobbyist, the public also knows who the lobbyist represents
Right.
with business before the city. In the case of consultants, like at a consulting firm like Berlin Rosen that doesn't lobby, they're not registered lobbyists, the public doesn't know.
But they don't lobby. That's the point. They haven't raised that type of issue to me. It's just as simple as that. Part of why we're very comfortable with the disclosure process is it's really straightforward. I mean, I have this conversation with any lobbyist I come across. I say, I need you to understand, if you're a city registered lobbyist and you're about to open your mouth and speak on behalf of a client, that's going online, this month. And the individuals in that article just don't lobby me on behalf of clients. They don't raise those kind of issues. That's the bottom line.
Real estate firms and others who have business in front of City Hall be able to give to outside political organizations directly tied to you while they are lobbying the city and doing business with the city?
I think it's really important to look at the laws that govern us. And I would like to see a very, very different world, but we're not in that world yet. I'd like to see a world where, and I agree with Secretary Clinton on this, I believe there should be a constitutional amendment to reverse the impact of the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court. I think there's a whole lot of other things that should happen to reduce the flow of money into public life in general. But let's face it, the Supreme Court, not only in Citizens United, but in, I think it was Buckley v. Vallejo and other cases, has consistently said that private sector individuals and firms can spend freely. The Koch brothers, very famously announced they were putting $1 billion into this electoral cycle nationally. I respect that the media is supposed to hold us all accountable and ask us all tough questions, but I would ask for context. There are lots and lots of powerful interests spending vast amounts of money without any examination, without any disclosure. Anything associated with me is going to be fully disclosed. Anything even that's not directed by me but is supportive of me is going to be fully disclosed. And in a dynamic where millions and millions of dollars multiple times have been spent to attack things that I'm trying to do, it makes sense that there's going to be other people who try and push back and say that this agenda is important. And I think that's legal and understandable in the environment we're in.
Do you think they're giving money because they agree with your agenda or because they want special favor and attention from City Hall?
First of all, you should ask them. Second, what I say to people and what others have said is this is what we're trying to do. And this is what we're asking support for. I don't think people tend to give money for something they disagree with. Right over here.
Back on affordable housing, regarding the plans in East Harlem and elsewhere to their residents who keep voicing their concerns that the affordable housing, the percentage of units that will be affordable is just not affordable enough and that they'll be driven out of their neighborhoods, whether it's in East Harlem or Washington Heights or East New York. And there were some folks in East Harlem today that held a little demonstration about this. So what do you say to those people, and are you going to consider their proposals to make it more affordable for them?
Well, a couple of things. It's a very valid concern. Look, we've all seen the impact of gentrification over the last 10, 20 years in this city, and I addressed this in the State of the City remarks. It's a problem. There's some good things that come with gentrification, but there's some real problems that come with it, too. People have every right to fear displacement. They've seen too many of their family members and neighbors displaced. So what are we doing? One, let's look at where affordable housing is. First and biggest supply is our housing authority, over 400,000 people. We've stabilized the finances of the housing authority. We're going to protect the housing authority for the long term. By the way, East Harlem has the highest concentration of public housing of any place in this city, and it's going to be protected. Two, we have absolutely unprecedented investment in legal services to fight illegal evictions and harassment against tenants, and that's being applied especially in places like East Harlem where there are land use actions. Three, think about how the rezonings and all are going to go. They're going to add affordable housing to the mix. So one thing we can say for sure, and you've seen the kind of percentages and numbers, there'll be more affordable housing than there was before. Four, we're trying to preserve in place a lot of the affordable housing in the community. When I gave the State of the City, the woman who introduced me, Cheryl Morse, was part of a low-income co-op in Fort Greene. Hundreds of people lived there. We were able to preserve something that was on the verge of being privatized, but keep it affordable housing for the long term. We're going to be doing that in East Harlem and a lot of other places. It's a very fair question, how much farther down the income scale can we reach? And I think there's two crucial answers to that. One, we believe in a mix of incomes. There are a lot of struggling working people and folks in the middle class who can't find affordable housing in the city. We need to preserve affordable housing for folks who are working, for folks who are poor, for folks who are middle class, and that's what the plan says. Two, in any given rezoning or in any given land use decision, we're looking to maximize the number of units that we can get to folks with the lowest incomes, particularly in a community like East Harlem that's had a lot of folks at that income level who need the help. So what I think people will see is additional efforts to reach the lowest income folks as we go through this process. But you have to look, in my view, at that whole package to see the many ways that it affects people. I'm going to finish up this side and come over that side. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that point, there was a recent meeting in East New York where some residents and even some elected officials raised the very specific concern about white people moving in to an area that has been long populated by minorities, and they had raised this as a concern to oppose your plan. I'm wondering if you can address that very specific element about the diversity that some people are concerned about when it comes to the zone.
I don't think this is about race. I think it's about economics. I think it's about protecting economic diversity. You know, we in this city have an extraordinary tradition of diversity and people living together. There's also been a lot of concern raised lately about, you know, our communities still are not as connected as they could be. Our schools are not as representative in some places as they could be. This is the nature of New York City. These are big, challenging questions that we keep working on. But economic diversity should be something that crosses all those boundaries, in effect, ensuring that working folks, middle-class folks, and lower-income folks can all continue to live here. I think that the biggest danger has nothing to do with any narrower concerns. I think it has to do with the possibility of the city becoming exclusive and no longer available to working people. And so the rezoning in East New York is meant to preserve a lot of the affordable housing there now, protect people against harassment, which would happen, by the way, if there were not a rezoning. The market forces alone would unfortunately be encouraging some unscrupulous actors to act in a harassing or illegal way towards tenants. And obviously to build a lot more affordable housing, because East New York is one of the places where there is land to build a lot more affordable housing. So this, to me, is about protecting the economic diversity of all our communities. And I think the vast majority of New Yorkers are very comfortable living with people who don't look like them, are much more concerned with the problem of are they going to be able to live in their community and be economically viable.
You called the MTA capital plan a good result, but there's a lot of elected officials who are upset about the Second Avenue subway delay in funding.
That's a nice ringtone, Marcia. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, the MTA chairman had been threatening all year that they were going to pull funding from the Second Avenue subway if the city didn't put up more funding. The city put up, I believe, a historic amount,
it did.
$5 billion. And then they still cut it anyway, and it doesn't seem like City Hall is too upset about that. A lot of people...
Look, I think, no, it's not. The final result became clear. I don't think the communication was as good as it should have been, but the final result became clear. Mr. Prendergast made clear that there is a legitimate timing issue about how and when they can use the money effectively, but that as soon as those issues got resolved, that there was an ability to go faster, they would come back and make adjustments. So I'm comfortable with that. No one misses the fact of how long Phase 1 has been taking. That is a legitimate problem. Phase 1 of the Second Avenue subway proved to be much more complicated, and a huge amount of resources was put into it, but it proved to be complicated. So that part about trying to figure out what's the legitimate timing and how legitimately you can use the money, that's fair. But the amendment he made, which I think he should have said in the very beginning, was as soon as they resolve those issues and they're able to go faster, they'll come back and make those adjustments.
When has the MTA ever been ahead of schedule on construction?
That's not the question. The question is that it's a question of what is the vision. The plan we agreed to with the reforms we wanted, we're very comfortable with. And on this point, if so long as there's a guarantee that as quickly as it can be moved, it will be moved, I'm comfortable we're on the right track.
Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering what you make of the opinion of the Obama administration that clearing homeless encampments is the wrong way to go, if not unconstitutional, given that we've had the situation downtown and in East.
I couldn't disagree more on the constitutionality, and our team has been working very closely on this. And obviously, I always refer to our corporation counsel and former U.S. Attorney Zach Carter. I think he is tremendously capable and helps us to figure out what's the right way to go on these issues. No, I think what you should look into is why were these encampments tolerated year after year, decade after decade in the city? They are not humane. They're not fair to the people in them, and they're not fair to the surrounding communities. I believe we're absolutely on firm legal footing. The difference is intensive services to the clients. Then you end up creating a fiction where the encampment's gone, but our administration has a fair point is if you don't accompany the removal of the encampment with intensive services to the clients, then you end up creating a fiction where the encampment's gone, but people are wandering the streets without help. That's not fair to them, and that's also not fair to the surrounding community. So we went into those areas with a very vigorous outreach plan. You've seen some of the numbers. A very substantial number of people accepted services. They went into safe havens and are getting things like drug treatment and mental health services. And we'll continue to do that. But it's 2015 in New York City. We're not going to tolerate, a permanent encampment. We had 21 of them. They have all been dismantled. They will continue to be not operational. We won't allow them to reassert. But we're going to constantly reach those individuals, very aggressive outreach in whatever language they speak to get them to the services they need.
And just a quick follow-up, what do you make of some of the criticism of the homeless folks that during the encampment roundups, their stuff was taken, it was destroyed, sort of like the Occupy Wall?
There was numerous, and it's a totally different situation. There was numerous announcements made of when the cleanup would happen. Again, multiple languages. I was up in the Bronx at one of the sites. Is Jen here? Yes, you saw it with your own eyes. You met the outreach workers. They went and talked to people. They told them they were going to take this stuff out. If you want to save it, come now and get it. But again, people living in, I'll use that as an illustration, a former railroad tunnel on mattresses in the open air, and then lots of other people coming today to do drugs together. That's not tolerable. That's not acceptable. Some of you have characterized it one way or another, but I believe in addressing quality of life offenses. I believe in the broken window strategy. What I find interesting is how did these encampments survive for all these years? That one in the Bronx, I've been there, I think, 10 years. Many have been there much longer. And we're not going to tolerate them. Okay, last one on this side, and we're going to the other side. Go ahead.
You asked quite a bit about desegregating some of the city's schools and changing some of the zoning. What is standing in the way of that? There's talk that you and Department of Ed officials are in favor of doing some of the rezonings for these elementary schools, but that there's pushback from community members. What do you see as standing in the way of?
I think I can safely say a lot of my public life has been devoted to trying to create a more fair society and more inclusion. But I also can say, as a public school parent until June, that you have to also respect families who have made a decision to live in a certain area, oftentimes because of the specific school, and have put a lot of their life into that. Have been deeply involved in the school, have made massive life decisions and investments because of which school their kid would go to. These are real issues. So we care deeply about creating as much inclusion, as much opportunity for people to learn together, work together, live together. But it's not an easy thing to solve. This is the history of America. This is something much deeper than some kind of push a button solution. So the Chancellor and I talk about this and talk about ways to approach the problem that are appropriate. But in terms of school zones, I think you have to start with the assumption those zones are constructed, on real geographical basis that makes sense in many cases, and you wouldn't disrupt them without a real careful, thoughtful process. And then in other cases that really does make sense, not just because of larger, social goals, but much more importantly because you may have a school that just physically can't handle the population anymore. You got to come up with some kind of accommodation. That's what typically we look at in those situations. Marcia.
Mayor, you cite statistics that life is improving in the city. What people tell us and what polls tell us is that the opposite is true about crime and homelessness. So I want to know what you say to constituents such as Debbie Ruiz, Cisco Rendon, and others who have written to this about the disparity.
Well, there's 8.5 million people in this city, and I think each one of them has a different opinion. And I'm not going to ever say, because a few people say one thing, that is the final word. And I don't think polls are ever the final word, because we've all been at this a long time. We've seen polls wrong many, many times. And that's something I would just remind you all of. We've gone into elections and many other situations like literally the night before, and the polls saying one thing and the outcome was another thing. So let's get to the brass tacks. What's really going on? What's really going on is the NYPD provides crime statistics, and they literally indicate what's happening to the lives of our people. If crimes are going down, that means fewer and fewer people are victims of crime. We know what's going on with homelessness, and I've talked about the fact that it is now a much more economically driven form of homelessness. It's a real problem, and it's going to be with us for quite a while, and we have to come up with constantly additional strategies to deal with it. But that being said, you cannot miss the fact that if there's I think it's about 170,000 new jobs since 22 months ago. If we see entirely new opportunities for our children like full-day pre-K, if we see more and more affordable housing being created, if we see companies coming here from all over the world who want to be here, tech sector is a great example. A lifestyle here that's safer than it's ever been. I'd be very happy to take a poll of New Yorkers on the basic question is life in New York City safer or not? We know by the numbers it's safer. That doesn't mean it's safe enough in every community. There are some communities where you have a lot more work to do. It doesn't mean there aren't quality of life issues around homelessness where we don't need to do better. We do. But the overall reality is clear, and people are voting with their feet. They want to be here. They used to be leaving. In the 60s and 70s, people left in droves. In 2015, people are coming in droves. We're going to be at 9 million people before you know it. That says something. Please.
The reason I'm asking this question is because on our social media pages and our Facebook pages, we are really inundated with people asking these questions. So do you think that there's a disparity between the New York that you see and the New York that some other people see, and that's why they raise these?
No, I do not think that. I have been living here since 1979. I saw the bad old days, and I would urge you all to be very straightforward in the way you interpret this to people. If you were here in those times, if you saw what Times Square looked like, if you saw what the subways looked like with the graffiti and no air conditioning and everything else, if you saw and knew the people who were leaving the city and never to come back, companies leaving, it is night and day. Now, I give my predecessors credit for having created a lot of that progress, but there's a lot more to do, and we're continuing to build upon it and add whole new elements to it, particularly in terms of fixing our schools and fixing the relationship between police and community. And I remind people that we said we would fix the relationship between police and community while driving down crime, and that's exactly what's happening. So I am going to keep making these changes. I'm going to keep explaining to people, and that's part of what I said earlier. I'm going to go out to communities directly and talk to people about it. But I talked to a lot of people, and I've been watching life carefully in this city for decades. It is a fact that the quality of life is better. It's also a fact that we have an income inequality crisis that must be addressed. Again, we have a new kind of economic reality around homelessness that must be addressed. We have neighborhoods where crime is still too high and gang and crew issues that must be addressed. But they are being addressed more and more, and that's what makes me proud of what we're doing.
Yes. As you were talking about going out to the people, getting your message out with the town halls, so do you think that then talking to the news media that informs the people is mutually exclusive?
No, as I said, we have multiple times in a week where we're talking about a host of issues. Look, there are some issues where they're big, important issues, and you guys will have many, many questions about those issues. There's other times like this where, let's talk about a whole host of things. We're going to keep doing all that because of everything else we have to do.
General topics.
Because of everything else, again, I'm being very clear about what I think will make sense and what will work. There's going to be lots of opportunities to ask me about lots of things. There's going to be lots of opportunities to ask deputy mayors and commissioners. I'm going to be at town hall meetings where you'll be present, and you saw the first one in Washington Heights where there was dozens of questions on a host of issues. There'll be more and more of those. There'll be call-in shows and radio. There'll be lots of opportunities. But I know you know this. I have a job to do. Much more important than giving the answers to the questions is actually doing the work. The way we got to full-day pre-K, the way we got to the largest affordable housing program in the history of the city, or municipal ID, or a lot of the job growth strategies, or improving the relationship between police and community, this took lots and lots of work. That's what I'm paid for, paid to get the job done. And that's where I'm going to put my time and energy. Hold on a second.
Mr. Mayor, so...
You're way off to the right there. I'm not used to someone that far to the right. Now go ahead.
In reference to the new communications paradigm that you envision, are you talking, should we expect fewer news conferences because of all of this other activity you speak of, or do you think it'll be a similar number?
It'll depend on the situation. There's going to be times where there's a lot going on and there'll be a lot of news availabilities. There'll be others where there'll be fewer. But the point is, it's going to add up to a lot. And look, if I'm on a radio call-in show where the host is asking a bunch of questions and then people ask questions, or I'm at a town hall meeting for an hour or two where a bunch of people ask questions, that's a lot of time and energy, as it should be, but it also gives you a lot of the answers you're looking for. So it's going to be a mix each and every week of different approaches. There's going to be a lot of information flowing. But it's very important to me that a lot of that be directly to the people. Yeah, please.
Will you continue to try to limit the topics of question?
Rich, I think there's going to be times where we just believe that makes more sense. If you're going to have 15 or 20 questions on a very valid, big policy area, we think that's what we should be focused on. And other times, there's going to be things like this where it's good to talk about a whole lot of things.
Mayor, are you concerned about your relationship with the rank and file police in light of the arbitrator's draft ruling, which gives them 1% in their angry response and their demonstration?
Well, the union mounted a response. I never think we should confuse union leaders with rank and file. I just think that's it. And there's, 35,000 total people on the force, obviously not all of them in that union. But the point is, I think it's important to say, one, I believe you would agree with me, this is a pure factual statement. Don't confuse union leadership with rank and file. Rank and file often has much more complicated, nuanced, multifaceted views. But the bottom line is this. We said from the beginning that we thought it was fair to have a civilian pattern and a uniform pattern. One by one, uniform unions that do the work of policing this city every single day came forward and agreed that it was a fair plan. Captains, lieutenants, detectives, sergeants. As I said, vast majority of uniform unions across all our departments agreed to our vision. So I think it's clear that it was fair, or you wouldn't have found that consensus. Arbitration process was initiated by the PBA, not us. We were happy to keep talking and try and resolve our differences, but within the pattern. The arbitrator made a decision. That's how arbitration works, and I think we should all respect. City's been on the wrong side of some of those decisions over the years and on the right side other times. But we don't protest the arbitrator. We respect the arbitrator had a job to do. So I think in the end that people will look at this, they'll see there was a consistency, because I think what working people look for is consistency, and there's been a consistency. We've said, here's our approach. We're treating everyone the same who's in uniform service, and that opportunity to finish a deal and get it done for the members of PBA exists, and we'd love to get it done.
So you're not concerned about your relationship with them?
Again, I think everyone thinks differently does this work. We offered a fair deal. I think the members of the PBA also look at other factors. I think a lot of them are very, very appreciative that Bill Bratton is our police commissioner. I think they appreciate that we invest to make sure our officers are safe. I think they appreciate the new technology that they have. They appreciate ShotSpotter. They appreciate the iPhones and tablets. A lot of people think that the training is helping. A lot of people like the new neighborhood policing model. So I think there's a lot of things that go through the minds of our officers, as it should be. And I feel that when they look at all the factors, they're going to see there's a real commitment here at City Hall to supporting them.
You stated that you have a job to do.
Okay.
You stated that you have a job to do, but as a member of the press in New York City, we have a job to do as well. And a lot of your events that you've attended are closed to press, photographers, and pools, and the pictures are sent out by your office. What is the reasoning behind that?
I think it all depends on the individual event, and I'm not involved in the mechanics of that, so you can talk to our press office, but I think there's some situations where if we're at an organization that does not choose to have press come into their event, and we're their guests, we have to respect their standards as well. So it's different to have our own reporter there than a member of the press.
What about a Halloween party at Gracie Mansion last week?
Again, I don't do the nuances of this, so I appreciate the question, but I just don't get into the nuances of which photographer comes to which situation. Go ahead.
You briefly touched on this a few minutes ago about the overall perspective of homelessness. We want to go a bit more micro with regards to children. We've examined some stats that in the last 5 years we've seen a dramatic surge, some neighborhoods seeing triple-digit pocket growth in terms of homeless children in our city schools. What's your viewpoint on that?
I think it's a huge problem. By the way, it was already emerging as a huge problem when I was the chairman of the General Welfare Committee back in, say, 2008, 2009. This is something we should be deeply concerned about. Now, it has gotten worse because it's more of an economic problem now. Again, homelessness for a long time in this city was first and foremost, or very largely, about people with substance abuse problems or mental health problems, all those folks who were deinstitutionalized by the state and had nowhere to go, and there was no real effort to follow up. But now it's more and more economic, which means more families. It means more children, obviously. It means people who are working or have worked recently and are ready to work. It's a horrible reality that we have to face. Now, very proud that we've gotten 38,000 people out of shelter and into homes. And I'm proud that the efforts to keep people in their homes to begin with are starting to work more and more. That's the anti-eviction efforts. That's the subsidies to stop someone from losing their apartment. But this is going to be a big, complicated effort because it's about economics. And that's the reality. It comes back to the tale of two cities we've been talking about so long. The city is more expensive than ever, and a lot of the jobs that exist in the city are minimum wage and low benefit. And those two realities don't match, and people are left out in the lurch. We're trying to find ways to fill the gap in the meantime. The bigger solutions are to go at income inequality. Higher wages, higher minimum wage, guaranteed benefits, investments. This is part of why I know you have many questions, all you guys, about the national work. I'm going to patiently and continue to explain to you that if you want investment we need in mass transit, affordable housing, education, infrastructure, that's only going to come from the federal government, and that's only going to happen if we change the political discourse in this country. But to really put people to work and to really create an inclusive economy so that people do not end up homeless, it's going to take an immense amount of work to change the level of opportunity available to people.
Mr. Mayor, with regards to what you mentioned earlier about commissioners within your office and other officials that work underneath you and other agencies, are you turning a new leaf in terms of making them available to the media? And I simply ask because for weeks we have been trying to pound a way to try to get an interview with members of your administration with regards to the subject of homelessness and the transparency that you've been promoting of late. We've just met with Walt.
Again, I don't understand that. I mean that very honestly, because I've seen some of the key people on this issue and many other issues out talking to you guys in different settings, and they certainly want that to be the case. So we will follow up on your particular request and get it done. But the point is, and I will say the obvious, you guys talk a lot to Commissioner Bratton. You talk a lot to Chancellor Farina. That we're going to do more and more of getting our deputy mayors out. I know Tony Shores has been on a number of shows. All of the above. You'll see a lot of me, but you'll see a lot of them too. We got a lot to say, and we're happy to answer questions. And you know, whether it's directly to me here, or it's through the press office, or it's through a deputy mayor, you will get your questions answered. But we also have a job to do here. First and foremost, it takes a lot of work to get these changes made. And then second, we have a job to be out to the people with the message, in many cases unfiltered, and to hear back from the people. And I'm going to be doing a lot of that as well. I'm going to wave off Karen Hinton for a few minutes here. Yes, it's happening, Karen.
Mayor, back on the topic of homeless families, there are thousands of them that sleep in city shelters every single night. They are still challenged with the task of getting their kids to school. What is your response to the plight of those families as mayor and as a father, and what appears to be vast inefficiencies in the system when often they are assigned to shelters across the city?
Yeah, this is...
School sometimes 20 miles away.
Well, thank God that is a rarity. And the fact is that there is a priority to have families in shelters near the community come from. That is a fact. It doesn't work the way it should all the time. I couldn't agree with you more, but I want to just be clear. The policy, and in fact the policy is being reinforced, is to get people to shelter near where they come from. It's a very painful reality. I'm a parent, you know, first and foremost, and I think of a child becoming homeless. I want to dwell on this. It's before you even start talking about the school and the amount of distance to school. That's not the first problem. The first problem is they went from a home to homelessness. Do you know what that does to a child? You know, that's disruptive of their lives. And so our job is to try and stop that from happening. Again, we are in a private sector economy in which the cost of housing has gone through the roof. We are victims of our own success in many ways. And that, like everything else, is a double-edged sword. All of the success we were talking about a moment ago in terms of job growth and all of the things that make life in New York City very good also, unfortunately, have come together with the increase in housing costs. Gentrification, which has in many ways strengthened a number of communities, has also come with displacement. These are complicated realities. Our job is to throw in the kitchen sink, get every tool we have and use it. We've doubled the amount of capital spending on affordable housing. 38,000 people out of shelter. You would think if I had 38,000 people out of shelter into housing, we'd be done here. No, the supply keeps coming in. We do see some hope in the anti-eviction legal services. We've seen really good results there. With some of the subsidies to keep people in their apartments, we've seen very good results there. But the goal is to get to the root of the matter, and we can do a lot with our resources, but the big difference makers would be a $15 minimum wage. Big difference makers would be changes in federal policy that actually invest in New York City. Obviously, getting more and more employment to people who historically haven't had as much opportunity, which we're pressing every industry to do, including some of the big growth industries like tech. We need to fire on all those cylinders. When it comes to a young person who's in a shelter, it's our mission to try and reduce the amount of disruption and absolutely to tighten up the system so they are near their school.
Researchers that we've spoken with say that there is a need to focus more spending on after-school programs because a child who is moved from shelter to shelter is set back 6 months with every move. Is there a need to focus more spending on after-school programs and other services for the children so it doesn't become a generational issue?
I think there's a couple answers. First of all, every middle school child in the city has free after-school now available to them. Now again, a little give and take with you guys. It's a huge change in the city. I have seen next to no coverage of it. I would ask you to take a look at it. Every middle school child in this city now has free after school available to them. It's about, I think, 105,000 kids are taking advantage of it now, almost double the number that were just a few years ago. And this is an area where not so many years back, after school programs were being cut. We've now made it universal at the middle school level, and that's one of the most sensitive times in a child's life. It's less needed at the high school level just because kids are more independent and less likely to use it. I think there's a good question of are there specific things we should do at the elementary school level. But I think the point is, yes, there are some cases where we need to get additional supports to kids who are homeless, and we're doing some of that. I'm sure there's more we can do. But I actually don't want the kids to become homeless to begin with. And I don't say that as a vague philosophical statement. I'm saying our first energies are trying to stop them from becoming homeless to begin with.
Mr. Mayor, just going back to Henry's question a little bit, do you have any concern about the morale of rank and file police officers, and how do you keep yourself apprised of it?
Well, Bill Bratton's the finest police commissioner in this country, the most accomplished police leader, I think, probably in American history. Jimmy O'Neill's been on the force over 30 years, and there's a lot of other key leaders of the NYPD who come up from the ranks, who I talk to all the time. Now, you could say, well, if someone's in leadership, have they lost touch with the rank and file? I don't think so. I think they're folks who really understand the rank and file because they lived the life for their entire career. And I think the rank and file of the PD, like any other group of citizens, are affected by the public discourse and the news coverage and one thing or another. But I also think they feel the material reality. I can't emphasize this enough. We have a little bit of a difference, I think, in some of these discussions over material reality versus perception. And people keep coming back to polling or individuals you meet who have a concern. I just don't see the world through the prisms of polls. I get that perception matters. I think reality matters more. And again, maybe it's because I've been in so many situations where the polls were proven wrong that I just don't overweight that kind of thing. I believe that the union leadership has often set a very negative tone. That's not exactly a secret. I think sometimes people pick up on that. But I do think rank and file police who are there because they believe in the work, overwhelmingly, right? Maybe a few people think it's a way to make a living. I think the vast majority of them think of it as a calling. And they have a great leader, and they know it. I can't tell you how many officers have told me how much they appreciate that Bill Bratton's their leader. They have more training than ever. They have more equipment than ever and technology. They're being treated as professionals in ways that they weren't before. By the way, there's a lot of concern about unfair punishment for just day-to-day matters under the previous administration. A lot of officers have said they're appreciative that they're treated more respectfully. I think that adds up for a lot. CCRB is another great example. There's tremendous concern when I came in. I heard this from the union leadership. I heard this from rank and file, that CCRB took a very long time to handle cases, and it was unfair to the officers. It was certainly unfair to the community members who brought the cases. The average time now is down to 9 months, and we're going to continue to drive that down. And meanwhile, complaints to the CCRB about police are going down, which means fewer and fewer police are even having to go through that. So that's what they're experiencing, and that's what, maybe it doesn't cause a change in a belief or attitude overnight, But over time, those real material differences make all the world a difference to someone.
Given how much you've emphasized reaching out to the grassroots and talking to people where they are, is there a need to have more of that dialogue with the rank and file as opposed to hearing it from leadership?
I think it's always better to do more, and I do it in lots of different ways. But again, everything I'm seeing suggests that that combination of changes in their lives is registering with a lot of folks. And by the way, it should register. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. If all that investment was being made in you, that would say something. And it would say there's a real commitment to your success. And on top of it, they're succeeding, which I've said at many NYPD gatherings. They're part of a winning team that continues to drive down crime. Look at the 7% increase in gun arrests. Look at what we saw the other day with the 74 weapons. I think you all, like me, were very struck by that line of weapons. NYPD succeeded in getting off the street. You're going to see a lot more of that. I think people like to be part of a winning team, and they are part of a winning team.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer, if I could follow up on the PBA, part of what the union is arguing is that police officers are not the same as detectives or sergeants or lieutenants who have taken the pattern that you have offered them. Can you respond to that criticism? And are you saying that police officers are comparable to sanitation workers or fire?
I think everyone has different variations in their work, but we can certainly say there are plenty of, I think, sergeants, detectives, lieutenants, and captains who would tell you about being out on the front line and their lives being on the line. There's plenty of firefighters that would tell you about being out on the front line. All of this work comes with real dangers, and that's why we set the pattern differently than for civilians. And again, I think if all those other uniformed services believe it was fair, that speaks volumes.
Mayor, yesterday on Rikers Island, a correction officer was badly slashed by 2 inmates. This is happening at the same time. The Department of Correction is about to roll out a new use of force policy that's part of the Nunez federal settlement. Correction unions are pretty outraged, and they're saying they weren't consulted in the drafting of this new policy. The department kind of says otherwise. They're threatening to challenge it in court and, look at their legal options. I guess, what are your thoughts on this? It seems that the violence hasn't really been stemmed at Rikers in recent months, and going forward, what do you hope to see?
I think the incident was horrible, and I've reached out to Officer Calderon and look forward to speaking to him later today. I think the individuals who did it are going to have a lot more time in prison, but that's a different question than whether the reforms we're making make sense. The reforms are necessary. Sometimes we've talked about there's 2 sides of the spectrum we have to address simultaneously. We've got a violence problem, and then we've got another problem about the kind of punishments that were meted out that were counterproductive by any measure. Punitive segregation wasn't working. It wasn't humane. That was the Justice Department concern, but it also wasn't working. It was making people more violent, not less violent. So we're absolutely certain that those reforms are needed. I believe there was a very exhaustive process leading up to those decisions, where a lot of stakeholders were involved. And obviously, we had to come to a final understanding with the Justice Department. So we're going to continue to make those reforms. The violence problem is very real. I've spoken to you guys about it many times. I was shocked by the extent of it. When we fully looked into it, I had no idea how this was allowed to grow over so many years, but that's what happened. It's not acceptable. The changes Commissioner Pont has made, he has shown real success in the areas where he's piloted these changes, the facilities where he's put them in. We see a huge reduction in violence, and that's going to keep building out across the whole complex. We have a whole new generation of officers coming in who are being trained very differently. We're going to institute a very different visitation policy because, bluntly, a lot of contraband and weapons were coming in through visitation. Obviously, DOI has been very aggressive at going after bad actors and changing the screening of employees. But guys, think about it for a minute. Everything I just outlined, and we still have a lot of work to do. That's how rotten this situation had become. But we're going to just every day chip away at it. And I disagree with the union on this. Please.
They're saying that part of the problem here is these inmates in this particular incident are under 21. In the future, they wouldn't be able to put these inmates in punitive segregation. And some of the union leaders are saying that that's why they feel that they can.
Well, just disagree. I mean, again, I respect Commissioner Pont, who has been a successful reformer all over the country, but many other voices agree on this in the correctional world. This has been the trend more and more to get away from punitive segregation because it backfires and it's not humane. And we're not changing on that one.
Could you please comment on Quentin Tarantino's remarks at a protest?
Yeah, I did yesterday. It's just they're insensitive, inappropriate, horrible timing, wrong way to talk about police, and just wrong all around. Jen, did you have something back there? You are going to be the last call, Jen.
I mean, I just want to make sure you've resisted calls for Pont to step down.
I continue to resist those calls.
Also, what do you think about cops comparing? We had a front page story today, police were comparing, upset with their contract, saying that fast food workers got $15 an hour, and they were sort of saying that it's unfair.
Look, our police, we value our police intensely in the city. We constantly invest, and I've talked about, we've put in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars since I got here. Commissioner Bratton has spoken about this recently. Vest technology, training, improving the physical plant of our precincts. We're going to keep doing that. So we're investing a huge amount in our officers and their safety. And I fundamentally believe the work we're doing to improve police-community relations is going to add to their safety as well as the safety of communities. We're going to do all of that. We came up with a pattern that the other uniformed services found fair. I think that's the way to look at it. If you look at national perspective, very, very substantial compensation for our officers in terms of salary, in terms of benefits, pensions, et cetera. We think it's fair, but on top of that, it's very important to remember, that's just where you begin. The salary, the health insurance, the pension, everything you provide the officer. All the other support for our officers, which we must do for them, to keep them safe, to give them the best technology, the best training, the best facilities, we're going to keep making those investments. So we devote a huge amount to their safety and well-being, and we'll keep doing that.
What about just the fact that they were upset that fast food workers were at $15 and that...
I think it's apples and oranges. Mara, you can be, do you like Mara or Mara? Mara, you can be the last question.
Thank you for asking. Just to follow up on Bridget's question, I mean, even though you may not have regular interaction with rank and file in certain ways, I mean, you are actually followed around by a detail, and you do have regular interaction with them here at City Hall. Have you ever asked one of them for their thoughts on police morale?
I've asked a lot of police what they think. I'm not going to go into detail as to who I ask what. I remember I spent 8 years as a councilman, and 6, 6, 7, 2, 7, 6, and 7, 8 precincts I got to know very, very well and worked very closely with a lot of folks in those precincts, including rank and file. I've spent time talking to officers ever since. Look, if I talk to 1,000 officers, it's still not going to give me perfect perspective, but I believe I have a good core understanding of the challenges they face and the things they need and the things they value. One of the things that comes through all the time, they want really good leadership on every level. They want to be treated as professionals. They want us to invest in the things they need. I hear that in lots of different ways. And clearly, they want to know that their work matters to everyone who makes decisions about the budget and policies, and it does to us deeply. And we're showing it by really, putting the resources in play to help them and to protect them. Thanks, everyone.
Jeff, one more question, Jeff, and then I promise you.
Karen, you're sending mixed messages today.
I know, I'm sorry.
We looked at
Now you're supposed to say no more questions right now, Karen. Okay, go ahead.
your offices. Out of 741, 38% were delayed 60 days or more. As public advocate, you would have given yourself a D on those measures. Why is your office taking so long to respond to this?
Look, I've said to people, I want us to address the foils as quickly as can be. They are, a lot of them, very complicated, and I know you guys, when you put them in, you want a lot of information in many cases, and you want it to be accurate, and we are very careful about making sure we fulfill the request fully and accurately, but that takes a lot of staff time. And bluntly, the volume is very high and has continued to grow. So we will constantly look to be faster, but when we give you something, we're also going to be very, very certain it's accurate.
Do you also recognize that not all of those foils are from the media? Some of those are...
Sure, of course, but it's the same point, that many of them are very elaborate requests. They take a lot of time, and we have to do them right. Thanks, everyone.
What happened to your wrist, Mr. Mayor?
This is, you would know, you're an umpire. This is from softball, early in the season.
How did you hurt yourself?
This is one of our practice scrimmages. There was a double play, runner went off first, someone called line drive, threw it back to me. We succeeded in the double play, and then the runner hit me. And it hasn't quite gotten better since.
Who was the runner?
We're going to find that runner.
Have you punished the runner?
Let's just say you won't be talking to that runner. You won't be able to interview him. Let's just say that.